Good afternoon, everybody, and it's wonderful to say, welcome back to Formula One, and more importantly, welcome back to the WTF1 Wrap, powered by MoneyGram. I'm your host, Dre Harrison, and with me for this race recap, once again, is Charlie Williams. Hey, Charlie.
Hello, hello. How are we?
I'm doing very well, although I must say, I like the McLaren theme, and I like the fact you're all dressed in black. It's like you've prepared for a funeral.
No, that is what I have done. So I started the race with a papaya cap on, and then within like 2 laps, I changed it to this black one because I felt like that was more appropriate.
Well, we'll get to McLaren briefly in the not too distant future, but yeah, the theme is quite fitting, if I do say so myself. And I mean, look, let's be honest. There's only one main topic to talk about in an otherwise pretty dominant showing by Red Bull Racing. We'll talk about them at the end of the show, but the showstopper, the 41-year-old, the man of the hour, Mr. Magic Alonso, everybody. Whew. My word. Fernando Alonso, his 99th career podium at the tender age of 41, and he earned it, Charlie. What a drive that was.
Yeah, do you know what? I'd say that I can't believe that he got a podium, but I absolutely can. Like, what a guy. I actually can't believe he's pulled that off. I think I said the other day, as a McLaren fan, I've never been Alonso's like biggest fan just because of how that whole like disaster ended, and I guess you could say the kind of like toxicness ended, but so I've never really rooted for him, but that doesn't mean I've never underestimated how talented he is, and he is probably one of the most well-rounded drivers I have actually ever known. And I know this could be widely controversial, but he is one of those drivers that just managed to get the best out of the car and has even won championships in cars that were not vastly superior. And I genuinely think that we could be seeing him fight for podiums on a regular basis this year.
Well, I wouldn't go that far about not superior equipment. The Renault back in the day was a rocket ship. But I will say this. I fully say on the record, I'm a Sebastian Vettel fan of many, many years. So I'm currently grieving about a retirement that was clearly 1 year too early. But I was always sitting here thinking, was the hype real? Like, we saw it all through testing, we saw it in practice, we even saw it in qualifying to a degree. Maybe not quite as... It's actually weird how, like, Fernando Alonso qualifying off the front 2 rows might have actually felt like it was a slight disappointment. But as this race went on, it was abundantly clear. This Aston Martin is real. It's a quick car. And, I mean, there's no getting around it. He just humiliated the 2 of the 3 biggest names in this sport. Ferrari, we'll get to them later on. Not a good day at the office as far as I'm concerned at all. And then Mercedes, who were just slow by comparison. Alonso ahead of both factory Mercedes. And I think that's probably the main pivot to talk about here, Charlie. Like, Mercedes are not even the best team on their own power unit at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna. That Aston Martin is an absolute rocket ship. There's no denying that. But I'm not going to turn around and say that I think they're going to be challenging for wins and stuff this year, because I think to do that you'd have to take both Red Bulls out of the equation, and I don't see that happening unless something really bizarre happens. But yeah, it is a shock that Mercedes just haven't seemed to get it together as well as Aston Martin have. I'm just amazed at how developed that car has become.
Oh, 100%. Look, it is certainly a much stronger car than it was last year. Last year, they look, this time a year ago, this team had no points through the first 3 rounds and was dreadful. Vettel had missed time through COVID. As Charlie knocks the microphone over.
I'm not having a good time. Clearly, Alonso's like podium is just like
he's having an effect. It's having an effect on her. But no, like it is wild. In that, like I said, this time last year, this team had scored no points. They were towards the back of the grid. Vettel had missed time through COVID. Hulkenberg had to be drafted in the 11th hour. They were struggling for points, and now they've got a man on the podium first round. That is incredible. Lance Stroll was also very solid in 6th. More a little bit about him in a bit as well. But Like I said, Mercs are the second best team on their own power unit. They struggled by comparison. More on them in a bit as well. But again, with only one Ferrari finishing, Aston Martin are second in the Constructors' Championship after the first round. That is something that is unimaginable. Like Fernando himself said 8 months ago, you would never have dreamed of this happening at Aston Martin. And yeah, what a job. This team's got something. I think you're absolutely right for what it's worth. I don't think we're talking about wins and title contention, but no. I think if they are genuinely in the fight with Ferrari and Mercedes, the fight for the silver medal could be very fun, at least.
Definitely.
I don't know about you, Charlie. I just think it's nice that we've got another team in the mix again, more than anything else.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, I mean, I don't want to say too much for that because we're going to go more into this later. But I feel like we've got one team. I don't feel like we've got a top 3 anymore. I feel like we've just got one. And then it's kind of like the next 3, isn't it? Like it's kind of, it's almost sectioned itself differently this year, because I would also argue there's not really a midfield. It's just the rest of them.
Yeah, it's just a mess of all the other hot. Yeah. Again, it is still early days at the end of the day. Let's not forget that it is still the opening round, but it does certainly feel like it's one team and then a second group of 3, and then it's everybody else. We'll get into a little bit now on that one. Guys in the chat, if you're watching along with us, feel free to send in what you thought was the MoneyGram send of the day for the best overtake you saw during that race. I've got a sneaking suspicion, I've got a hunch what I think it's going to be, but let us know in the chat, and you could pick them as well, and we'll have a chat about the halfway mark. But over the next half hour or so, we're also going to go up and down the grid and talk about the winners and losers on the grid. It's a bit of a mess, to say the least, but we're going to try and define each team as we go up and down the grid. So again, like we did on Friday, we're going to go in reverse championship order on this one. So let's start off with Williams first and foremost. And Williams, wow, a point! Alex Albon in 10th. Williams are on the board straight away. That's something we did not say very easily throughout most of 2022. But Williams on the board, Albon 10th, Logan Sargent 12th. Again, I think this team's made massive improvement, Charlie.
Yeah, this does make me really happy. At the start, it wasn't making me happy because they were fighting with McLaren. But then, you know, they broke anyway, so that didn't matter. So I can continue to be happy for Williams now. Sargent was the best of the rookies, I believe. So, which in a Williams, like when you consider that, I know that, you know, they've made steps towards improvement, but in a Williams, like that's incredible. I'm really happy for him. And then you've got Alex bringing home his first point, like the first. What is wrong with me today?
Take your time.
Race was crazy.
Yeah.
And then you got Alex bringing home points, which was great for the first race of the season. You know, yesterday I wrote a story about Alex and he claimed that he could have made Q3 and if it wasn't for the damage that was on his car. And I admitted I scoffed a little bit and I was thinking, no, like surely not. But actually that Williams looks reasonably impressive, especially when other teams don't seem to be performing as well as them.
This is a rebuilding team, let's not forget. This is a team that's got a brand new team principal in James Vowles. Their head of aero left. Their management structure's a bit all over the place. This was a team that was like, well, if we're bottom, as long as we're a competitive bottom, then no one's going to complain. That's what Albon said on Friday. So to get a point, first time of asking, and be a genuine midfield runner, like, that's a really, really impressive weekend. I think they'll happily take that all day long. As Charlie mentioned as well, I'd have to give a shout out to Logan Sargent. 12th place on debut, only I think about 8 or 9 seconds behind his teammate in Alex Albon. That's a really solid first showing for the American, and a good base to build on for the rest of the year. That's a good first weekend, and a definite winner of the weekend for Williams, certainly. I thought they were going to be stone dead last. They're not. They're solid midfield, and that's a really good sign. Hopefully it can continue as the rest of the season goes on. AlphaTauri are next up. Now, this is an interesting one, Charlie, because Tsunoda, you may have seen towards the end of that race, was pushing Albon for that final point in 10th place. Nick de Vries was down in 14th in the end. Again, probably a bit better than anticipated for AlphaTauri.
I don't know. I think they probably got a little bit lucky. with other, like I say, other cars not performing where they should have done. But I do feel like Nick was a little bit. Honestly, this race has just like done me over. I am a very sad McLaren fan. That is why I can't get my words out. Yeah, Nick was a little bit. Nick was a little mugged over today during the virtual safety car. He was left out to dry, I think. There
A little bit, yeah.
Everyone, around him pitted. So had that not happened, I think he probably could have done a little bit better. But I am a Nick fan, so I don't know. But I mean, Yuki had a fairly good weekend. He should feel very confident. I think out of the both of them, I would say that Nick is the most all-round driver. And I was I was fully convinced that Nick would have Yuki from the off, but Yuki managed to keep Nick covered all throughout the race, almost grabbing points, and in a not very good car, I am going to say. So I think he can feel pretty good about how his third season in F1 has started.
I think it's a good result. I mean, AlphaTauri were 9th best team last year. So if they've got a car that's 11th off the jump, that's not bad at all. Tsunoda, I think, drove pretty well. Was unlucky not to get a point at the end. Just couldn't find a way around Alex Albon. Those Williams have always been really hard to pass in a straight line because they generate so much top end. And, they are very, very hard to pass in a straight line. So for Tsunoda to come 11th, that's not bad at all. I'd actually probably give them a partial winner credit out of the two on this one. I think that was punchy from AlphaTauri. Again, they're in the mix for points. That's half the battle because a lot of the time AlphaTauri were not doing that last year. So I think that's a net positive for the AlphaTauri overall. Wanted to see a bit more from De Vries, but again, he doesn't look like an outlier. He doesn't look like he's out of place. For a guy that's only his second ever Grand Prix, I think that's absolutely fine, to be honest with you. Again, early days, don't want to get too judgmental too quickly, but again, I think there's some signs of positivity to take away from AlphaTauri in the early going. Let's talk about Haas. Haas, this was a bit of a struggle for them. They were 13th and 15th in the end. Magnussen 13th. He was the only man to start on the hard tyre, as opposed to everybody else on the softs. And then Hulkenberg, who had such promise, started in P10. I thought maybe Haas had an outside chance of a point. And it just didn't work out. Poor start, damaged front wing that he had to change. I think we kind of have to call Haas losers here on this one, Charlie. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I don't really have much to say on Haas. They kind of existed, but didn't really do much, did they? But I had quite high hopes for Hulkenberg, and I am quite gutted for him. And Haas did confirm that, the front wing damage was the reason for his lack of performance. But so it looked like they had some pace, but I just don't think it was meant to be today.
Yeah, there's not too much to take away from it really. Magnussen did a solid job of getting back up the field once he started on that hard tyre, and they got a hard stint out of the way. But again, I think there was a bit more promise with Hulkenberg, given he'd been one of the stronger guys all weekend, and then again his race was effectively ruined 20 seconds in. It's like someone tell the Haas drivers to be a bit more careful on the opening lap, because we saw this last year with Magnussen when he had 3 black and orange flags for first lap incidents, and we've had another one here which has crippled Hulkenberg's race, which is just really unfortunate because he's a guy that we know has had a good weekend up until that point. So yeah, I would say Haas is probably a little bit of a loser overall on the weekend. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about Aston Martin. Now we've talked about Fernando, and again a phenomenal performance. He was driver of the day officially as well, 53% of the vote. I mean, to be fair, I don't think Alonso was ever going to lose a popularity contest. To be fair, we all know he's got a very rabid fan base. But again, completely deserved as far as I'm concerned. And also, Lance Stroll, we got to give some flowers to here as well, Charlie. 6th on the day. That was, given that there was genuine concern he might not race on the day, I think that's a really, really strong performance.
Yeah, definitely. Aston Martin have 100% been the winners of the Bahrain Grand Prix. Like,
the biggest
not technically, winners. But in our opinion, at this rate, I actually would say they're probably the biggest winners of the season. And I know we're only one race in, but the development that car has had, like we said earlier, is honestly just amazing. I'm really shocked. And Lance Stroll, come on, like, he is a broken man, and he's just managed that. I feel like I could be sending in my resignation as a McLaren fan and be jumping ship to Aston Martin at this rate. No, I wouldn't. I would never do that. If I got through the Honda days, I can get through this. But
shame for even entertaining the possibility. Shame on you.
No, no, never. But yeah, do you know my favourite part? I think was Alonso and Stroll colliding basically straight away into turn 4. Like it didn't take long, did it? And the best bit was when they Alonso was like, "Oh, investigate it," and they just refused to tell him that it was Stroll.
It was peak Alonso, where like half an hour after this incident had even happened, he's sitting there in the car going, well, who hit me? He and the team was like, they just didn't want to tell him that his own teammate. Like, that's the terrifying thing about this race, is that yes, Aston Martin were brilliant, 3rd and 6th, one of their best weekends since coming into Formula 1, probably is their best weekend since coming into Formula 1, and yet despite that, if Lance hits Alonso's car a foot to the right, it might ruin both their races, and we're just not having this conversation 15 seconds into the Grand Prix.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much these things can swing at a time. And Alonso hit Carlos Sainz when overtaking him as well in the second half of the race as well. So that could have been another incident where Alonso kind of got away with it. I heard Martin Brundle on commentary literally say that they build these cars tough at Silverstone. So he was probably right on that one. There were so many ways this could have gone wrong for Aston Martin. But sometimes the racing gods will rule in your favour. And shout out as well before we move on from them. And I completely agree with you guys in the chat for the MoneyGram send of the day. Fernando Alonso's pass on Lewis Hamilton was absolutely sensational. That was an early contender for pass of the year. Didn't even need DRS. The slide down turn 10, it's just such a difficult corner as well, and to be able to line them up and pass him like that, wow, sensational pass. I mean, I can't think of one that was better than that, Charlie. Are you thinking the same?
Yeah, that was probably my send of the day too. Although I would like to give honourable mention to Yuki Tsunoda, because he did a double overtake on Nick De Vries and Guan Yu Zhou as well. And that was quite a move, but you just can't go wrong with a little bit of like Lewis Alonso battle. It's like my favourite pastime to watch.
Two men with a combined age of 79 going at it. There's enough for like 2 bus passes between them there. And yeah, old man game with nearly, those two have got nearly 650 Grand Prix between them. And yeah, it lived up to the billing. It was a fantastic fight, back and forth. Alonso and Hamilton stayed with him afterwards as well for a good few laps as well. Just an excellent fight between the pair of them. Firm but fair, and just good racing all around. Loved all of that. Fantastic weekend for Aston Martin. Probably their best in Formula 1. Lance Stroll, again, as mentioned, 6th with 1 good wrist and 9 good toes. We didn't even find out that he'd broken his toe until Saturday night as well, on top of the wrists that were talked about so much. So yeah, Stroll, superb performance. Maybe one of his best in F1 so far as well. Just all-round brilliant stuff. Alfa Romeo is an interesting one. They're a very quiet lot. They've been very quiet for most of testing and most of the weekend. But who's in 8th place? Valtteri Bottas just comes in, drives his race, beat Pierre Gasly over the line right at the end, and that's, again, to defend 2 very important points. Zhou down in 16th was unfortunate at the end there. I think, didn't he pit during the VSC at the end as well? And it just didn't work out for him because he free stopped. Yeah, but Valtteri Bottas, he's just solid. 8th place again, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, he was up 4 places from the start as well, and I think that was the best start out of all of them. I do think Alpha got a little bit forgotten about, but they've kind of like just been there. And I think Valtteri finishing 8th is such a good haul of points, and it's great to see him up there, especially when you consider that like there's 4 teams almost fighting for those top spots now, but that also takes 8 spaces for points.
Absolutely.
So that only leaves another 2, and for Valtteri to be one of them, I think that's incredible. Really good start for Alfa Romeo.
He just goes about his business. You never predict it. he's quiet, he gets on with it, and he just finishes in the points and gets the max out of the car. And I think that was about the maximum Alfa Romeo could realistically give. 8th place. Also, shout out to Reynard in the chat, who made this great point as well that's worth mentioning. I think part of the reason they put Zhou on a free stopper was to take the fastest lap point off of Pierre Gasly, which would have been an extra point because Gasly got into the points. We'll get to him very shortly as well. So again, with every point mattering, especially down the bottom of the board of the constructors, a clever tactical play from Alfa Romeo if that was indeed the plan. So yeah, clever race all round from Alfa Romeo, and 4 points on the board for Valtteri Bottas. So yeah, I think that's a win for Alfa Romeo in the grand scheme of things. I would say so on that one. The time has come. Should we play the funeral music here? I'll get the organ going. Bum 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 bum.
Yeah.
McLaren.
Yeah.
Charlie, what happened? My darling Charlie, what happened?
I don't know. There's a McLaren fan crying party at mine tonight. It's at 7 p.m. So by the time we come off here, it should give you plenty of time to make it. I'm really trying to remain positive and not write them off because it's literally been one race. But it just seems like everything is going wrong. I mean, Lando started with a hydraulics issue, and don't even get me started about the amount of pit stops he made during that race.
Was it 6?
And then Oscar,
yeah, it was 6.
5? Was it? Oh my goodness!
6.
Like. And then Oscar had an electrical issue and was forced to retire from the race, which I feel really sorry for him. It's his first race in Formula One, and look what happened. I'm just absolutely gutted for both of them, and to be honest, I'm gutted for myself as well because I don't want to go through all of this again. It's not good enough. If I end up eating my words by the end of the season, then fine. But as a team who've been the best of the rest for the past few seasons, minus last year because it kind of steadily went downhill. This is just not good enough. I mean, just the pit stop situation was awful, and maybe this is just me being a pessimistic person, but I would have just retired the car.
I wouldn't have blamed
frustration, and that's probably why I don't own an F1 team. But I'm just really sad, and I just want everyone to be really sad with me.
I can't promise I'll be sad for you, Charlie. What I might do, out of the goodness of my heart, is go to Amazon Prime and maybe send you over a big bar of dairy milk to help for the crying party, because that was
thank you.
That's about as nice as I'm going to be, because that was shambolic. In every way, shape, or form. I mean, the pace of the car is not dreadful. It's clearly on the level of Williams, roughly. So we're thinking maybe outsider of points. But none of that matters if your car's not reliable. It's a real shame on that one. Norris again is doing the Lord's work. He was fighting with the Williams for points. And Piastri, well, first stop came in, downshifts weren't working, and then the electrical failure. His race is done. They're the biggest loser of this weekend so far, maybe the biggest loser of the entire season so far, given just how down even McLaren themselves have been going. Before this season even started, we knew it was going to be bad, but pound for pound, they might be the worst team in Formula One right now. We need to see more. We need to see what this car can do, this MCL 60 can do over the coming few rounds. They're still talking about that Baku upgrade package coming. I hope it works, and I hope they're not too far in a hole before that point, Charlie, because not promising.
Yeah, I don't feel very confident, to be honest. I'm almost ready to just write off the year already. Do you know what? This is probably really sad, and people probably will watch this and be like, really? But I always post a little pre-race selfie in my McLaren gear and send it to the team. And every time I do it, and then they've got an awful race, I'm always like, why did I bother?
Your selfies are being wasted on the world, Charlie. This is an emergency. Clearly. Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Should we move on and make you feel a little bit better? Yeah, I'll make you feel a little bit better, because we'll talk about Alpine and what a mixed bag this was for Alpine. I mean, on the one hand, first and foremost, let's praise Pierre Gasly, who started this race from the back of the grid after track limits ruined what was already a horrible Q1 for him. Ninth place from the back of the grid. That's a fantastic drive from Pierre Gasly. Quite possibly driver of the day if it wasn't for a certain guy in green.
Yeah, he did really well. He'd made up like 8 places by halfway through the race. So, I mean, starting P20, I'm very impressed. Whether that was mostly because I feel like I'm being very pessimistic today.
Really? What gave it away? I mean,
whether that was because, everybody else was having issues. But again, that's what Formula One's about. You've got to, make use of the luck of the hand that you're given. And, well, Gasly played it well, didn't he?
Very much so. That was an inch-perfect drive from him. Almost had 8th at the end. Was just a second behind Valtteri Bottas's Alfa Romeo. But that's still an excellent result, given that we've been pretty down on Alpine all the way through testing again. It was more like a bit of a mystery. They were a very hard team to place because they had testing. There was rumours they were going to upgrade the car for the first round. They did. They replaced almost every major part, and they still didn't look massively impressive. Ocon, I think, qualified 10th in the end or something along those lines. I think he was on row 5. So that was okay. But at the same time, that's still probably a little bit down on where Alpine were last year. So for Gasly to come through from the back and still get points, that's a solid first drive for the team as well. That's giving us a brand new car to him as well. So that's a really solid job from Gasly. Esteban Ocon, I believe, just tied a record, Charlie. I'd like to fill in the viewers on this one.
He did, yeah. He equaled the record with Pastor Maldonado from 2015 in Hungary for the most racing penalties in one race.
3 of them things. He had a hat-trick.
3.
A hat-trick of failures from Esteban Ocon. It was so let me get this straight. It was a 5-second penalty for lining up in the wrong. He overextended on his grid box.
Yeah.
So that was a 5-second penalty for that. He got a 10-second penalty for not serving the 5-second penalty properly. I think while he had to change his front wing, as a part of it was dangling off to one side as well. So he got 10 seconds for that. And then when he was in that pit stop, he sped in the pit lane. So another 5 seconds.
Yeah. Honestly, it was probably the most humorous moment of the whole race, to be honest. I was just like, after every one, I was just like, more, but not because I don't want, Ocon to do well. I just thought it was really funny how it was just one after another. And I could just have this image of him sat in the car, and them telling him, Ocon, you got another 5-second penalty. And he'd be like, ah!
I think he said at one point on the team radio, I've been doing these things all the time. Why is it a penalty now? And I'm like, Ocon, that's not the sort of thing you should admit to on the radio. I don't think that's a particularly wise idea. It was a bit of a write-off for Ocon in this race, really. I mean, the front wing damage and then the penalties. It was just a write-off of a day for Ocon. I think they parked it early as well before the end of the race. Even there was no point in even continuing. At that point, he was so far down the bottom, it just didn't matter. I think after we didn't get a full-on safety car for a certain red car failing, I think that was pretty much the end of the day for him and the rest of Alpine. But I'm calling it a wash. I'm not calling them a winner or a loser. They got 2 points. They probably should have been... Actually, no, I'll take that back. I'm putting them down as a loser. Only 2 points on the weekend. Ocon having an embarrassing race. Gasly tried, bless him, but I'm putting him down as maybe a slight loser overall.
Yeah,
given
it was pretty embarrassing, wasn't it?
Yeah, basic errors. Let's talk about Mercedes. Now, I saw the chat. They were not happy about Mercedes in this race, and I can't say I blame them on this one, Charlie. I think this is a bit of a wake-up call for the factory Mercedes team. Hamilton 5th, Russell 7th. I think the one stat that jumps off the page to me, Lewis Hamilton was 50 seconds off the win. 50. 2/3 of a lap around Bahrain in that case, really. I don't think there was any huge problem with them, Charlie. I think they were just slow.
I think they're a really tricky one. Let's be honest, they weren't ever going to be anywhere near Red Bull, and I don't think they were going to be anywhere near Ferrari, and they were quite quickly shown up by Ferrari as well. I was really hoping going into this that they just hadn't turned up, the wick properly. But it seems like this is what we're going to get from the Mercedes. Of course, upgrades are coming. It could be different track to track. But it's not looking brilliant, is it, at the moment? But it's not also looking horrific. They're still up there. But I think, if that was another team, if that was, I don't know, Williams up in those positions, we'd be praising them. But it's just because it is Mercedes and you expect them to be a lot better than, you know, what they're bringing to the table right now. I think that's where the shock factor comes in. But I mean, on Lewis's radio at the end of the race, he seemed quite positive still.
To be fair, given he's just finished in 5th and they were talking about how down he was on this car on Saturday, maybe Brendan Fraser doesn't exist and Lewis Hamilton's secretly a contender for Best Actor at the Oscars later this year, because either he's putting a very brave face on this, or Mercedes are a lot worse than I think they appear. Because, look, I'm going to say it again. They were beaten by their customers. That's never a good look. And it was legitimately on merit, no shenanigans. Both Astons beat both Mercedes. That's just not good enough for a team of Mercedes standards. This was meant to be the revenge tour. This was meant to be the car to get them back up the running again. And Toto Wolff on Saturday night was saying that this concept is probably never going to win. He literally said that after qualifying, after they qualified 6th and 7th. And they just said, I don't think we can even develop this concept into being competitive. So I think that's near or less an admission that they've gotten this car wrong and that this season might end up being a write-off. And their tyre wear wasn't particularly great either, to be honest with you. They're one of the first guys of the front runners in to change tyres either. So I don't think there's a lot of positives to take away from Mercedes. I've got them down as losers here, Charlie, because I don't care what you tell me. Merckx finishing 5th and 7th is disappointing for a team of that standard.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is. I think I just don't want to admit that they've made this mistake again. Like, how do you go out of 2022 and come back with the same car, but only just slightly more developed than it previously was? Like, you'd think they just want to scrap that,
right?
Throw it away and just start again.
I can't disagree with any of that. I think it's a loser of the day for Mercedes on that in that conversation. Speaking of losers, Ferrari. What is it with you guys? What is it with the Tifosi? I don't understand. It's like Ferrari find new and creative ways to disappoint their fans. Like, it's just when you think they might have had a quiet, solid weekend, maybe 3rd and 4th. It was like, okay, maybe you've clearly got the second best car, and you think, yeah, it's okay. You know, maybe nothing goes wrong. It's a decent weekend. No, Charles Leclerc cars dies from 3rd place. And this was as well, Charlie, with half an hour before the race, they had to replace the electronics and the energy store on Leclerc's power unit. And they're only allowed 2 of those for the season, and they've already changed one before we'd even turned the racing wheel in anger.
Traditions. I don't know. It's just this Ferrari, isn't it? I feel like I'm never blindsided by what Ferrari pull out of the bag anymore, because it's just typical Ferrari. I mean, Charles did have a very good start. You can't take that away from him. Did the fresh softs help? You know, I don't know. You will never know, because, you know, if he had done that final Q3 run yesterday and risked the softs, he could have been starting in P2 instead, or even P1, who knows? But, I mean, none of it mattered, did it? Because by the end of lap 42, he was on the back of a scooter on the way back to the pits. So yeah, I am really gutted. I feel like I also jinxed this moment as well in our chat, because I was like, oh, my predictions are almost perfect. And then boom, yeah. Charles goes.
Yeah, we a little bit of behind the scenes for you here at WTF1. We have a Slack chat with all of us in it. Charlie literally said, my predictions are going to be spot on. And then the same lap, Charles Leclerc power units, and I literally said in the Slack about that. It was beautifully timed. It was like watching a sitcom. The comedic timing was beautiful. And
yeah, if you're a Ferrari fan, I'm really sorry. I'm not. And my invitation extends to you to be invited to the crying party.
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be a big crying session clearly at Charlie's afterwards, so please pull up, because yeah, Ferrari have honced it again. And what makes it even more worrying is that Sainz was beaten by Alonso in the second half of that race, so the tyre wear clearly hit Ferrari hard in the second half of that race, to the point where Alonso was able to gain the ground on Sainz and pass him on merit for that podium finish. So there might be a genuine argument that Aston Martin might have the second best car in the field right now, and Ferrari might have been overtaken by the Aston Martin, which would be alarming for their team as far as I'm concerned. Again, it's another loser tag for Ferrari. I mean, third and fourth would have been fine in the grand scheme of things, but the fact it's just one car in fourth place is just not good enough. Again, Aston Martin look like they're going to be a genuine threat for these guys. Now, get your sleeping bags out, folks, because there's only one team left to discuss, and it's Red Bull Racing, and wow, that was a beating. That was an absolute beating by Red Bull. 38 seconds on anyone that wasn't one of their own cars. Verstappen winning by 12 over Perez. What can you say, Charlie? Just a flawless performance from the guys at Milton Keynes again.
Yeah, I mean, Max Verstappen, amazing start, but did we expect anything less? Probably not. He started racing off into the distance, and I know we've only had one race, but it honestly would not surprise me if he went on to win every race this season, or if not very, very close. And I know we can't sit here and complain about Red Bull dominance, because we had years of Mercedes dominance too, but if we complained about the Mercedes dominance, does that mean that we can complain about this one as well?
Well, what I would say to that is that Formula One is a sport of dominance. That's the norm. Most teams, when they win a title, they do it by winning the majority of the races in front of them. Getting title fights that go all the way to the end and we have two teams on a fairly even level is rare. Like, it's not unthinkable, but that's not the norm. So I always sit back and I go, well, you know, it's the variety when it does happen that makes F1 what it is, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, but for me, like, the thing with Red Bull is that I don't feel like this really compares to like Lewis dominance era. This is more like Schumacher dominance, where you know, he could pit and still come out first, pretty much. The lead that they've got is just incredible.
There were people talking about Alonso potentially winning this race. Kieran. And Alonso was the universally agreed driver of the day, and he still finished 38 seconds behind Max Verstappen's car.
Yeah.
Max could have 3-stopped and had a shot at the win. Like, that's how fast Red Bull were. That's how fast Verstappen in particular was. And this was with him struggling with downshifts, and Perez openly admitting on Saturday night they had compromised the qualifying trim for race pace. And they absolutely destroyed the field. That is an bad omen going forward. And, well, you got to tip your hat to them. They have the best car. They have the best driver in the world right now in Max Verstappen, I would argue. And Perez is doing his job. He's following him home, and that's all he has to really do. 43 out of 44 points on the weekend. Again, can't really argue with that. Just an absolutely dominant team. Safe to say, we're putting them in the win column. I don't think Charlie needs to add too much more to that, right?
No, definitely not. They are absolute winners.
Absolutely. 1-2 finish. Fun fact, Brother Ryan's got like Red Bull getting 14 double podiums on the year at 14-1, and I'm very jealous of him at that because I think it's looking pretty good after the first round, if I do say so myself. Before we get out of here, Charlie, thoughts on the race overall? Here's what I'm going to do. As a spur of the moment, we're going to score each of these race recaps we end up doing, either here or on the podcast, out of 10 for entertainment value. So, out of 10, how would you score that?
I hate it when you make me rate things.
It's part of my job. I love it.
Maybe a 6.
Yeah.
I don't want to rate it too high because, again, it's the first race of the season. But equally, I was excited because it was the first race of the season. And yeah, it was okay. Just a lot of like quite humorous things happened. And even as a McLaren fan, I can appreciate that was quite humorous.
I agree. I'm going to go 6. I think it was an okay race. I think that ultimately you don't really want to see a 1-2 runaway at the front, but I think the fight between Alonso, Sainz, and Hamilton was intriguing. I think some of the midfield action was also quite decent with Tsunoda and Zhao and De Vries involved, and with the Mercs involved. I think it was okay. I don't think it was a terrible race. I don't think it was a great race. I think this was a pretty average, slightly above average race. I think for Bahrain, it was actually a little bit disappointing. Bahrain, I think, normally produces bangers. So I'm actually quite disappointed in that one. But, yep. That'll do it for the Bahrain race recap. I've been Dre Harrison. She's been Charlie Williams. There'll be a full-on podcast race review of everything in Bahrain coming up in the next couple of days with a special guest host, but more on that soon. But until then, I've been Dre. She's been Charlie. Thanks for watching. Take care.
Bye.